It's a long way from up in the balcony.
Thank you so much.
Iris, thank you so much for bringing this beautiful film to us.
Thank you so much
This
for
is-
watching it and for being here and for inviting me. Nothing makes sense anymore, in this world. So being here is a huge thing for me. And watching the film here with you guys, I was crying and laughing a lot. And it's very emotional for me.
Just like in the film.
Yeah,
So.
that's the Egyptian way of handling life.
I mean, the film really, it grapples with Jewish and Arab identities. It grapples with family past, generations, history. And it starts as kind of a tribute to your grandmother, and then it turns into a journey with you and your father. And I'm just wondering, where did this all begin? What prompted you to start filming this?
So I think that when I started, it was I had this huge, legendary story of my family and my grandmother and my grandfather, and everything there is very symbolic. In a way, I try to make it like an Arabic film, Arabic movie. But the longer I got into this journey with my father, I realized that it's not a love story between my grandfather and my grandmother. It's a love story between my father and his mother. And my father is a psychologist, and everything is kind of clear to him. He knows everything, and he's very rational about it, even though he cries a lot. At some point, I had a broadcaster telling me okay, we cannot have your father crying in every scene. But my struggle was how I can actually make my father, because he has everything kind of sorted out. How can I have him vulnerable enough as a character for my film? And I think it was here when I was in New York, Peter, hi, my producer here in New York, and I brought him here because my idea was to take my father to locations that are very symbolic to the story, and New York is a big part of it. He met his father here when he was 17, and coming here, he had the locations were so strong, and he started understanding that what he told himself doesn't really work anymore, because for the first time he realized that reflecting on his father wasn't such a great person, great parent to him. And I think that he always had this defense mechanism of my parents are great, and he tried fighting over raising me, and she did, and they're both great. But I forgot the question now, of course, but it was very emotional for me, and it still is. This film is very emotional for me. Seeing my father as a child is very hard.
And do you know? So part of seeing him as a child, you also created a character of him as a child. And what was going about recreating those scenes? And did he have input? Did he kind of show you what they had talked about as a kid? And what did that mean to you? You were kind of there in those recreations.
So yeah, I had some big plans for this film, but everything kind of didn't work like I wanted. But I did know that I want to have more of scripted scenes of my grandmother, because I wanted to have her as a character and have her point of view as well. And I didn't want to take it too seriously, because Egyptian people and Arabic films are all about you have to laugh and cry in every scene, and everything has to be over dramatic. And then I just used my life experiences for her. Scenes like the taxi scene in New York. I was obsessed with this man for so many years. I was so stupid in my 30s, and he treated me very badly. But every time I went to see him when I was drunk, I told the taxi driver, I hate this guy. I hate this guy. I don't want to see him. I don't want to see him, but yeah, take me there. So for me, imagining my grandmother going to see my grandfather after he has been such a douchebag, she'd probably like bitched to her taxi driver, or, you know, the very symbolic scene of her working as a cleaner, and, you know, there is something about what is considered polite, or and what is considered like barbaric or lower culture. And when I was in London, I felt that a lot. So for me, like the point where her boss changes the radio station is very like rude because he leaves. And so I took like themes from my own life, because my grandmother was always like this. She wasn't that approachable for me, also because of the language barriers. She spoke Egyptian Arabic, some English, and some Hebrew. And I could only imagine how it was like to be, and in a way I can relate to that, because I thought I'm going to be like an amazing documentary filmmaker, very famous. Had a very good start, but then things went down a bit because of how life is, and Israel is, and the world is, and politics is, and capitalism is. So I can really relate to her more now as a woman that is kind of like had her dream life, but then like going to Israel, being an like Arab Jew, and coming from a very like wealthy and wealthy even culturally, and then becoming like a cleaner, and looking down at, even though she was much more of an aristocrat than my Polish grandmother that didn't experience that. So all these themes are very interesting to me because I feel these layers in my life as well. And I wanted to kind of like bring her point of view, which is scripted, and I can only like imagine.
Well, it was really beautiful, and you captured, even though you weren't there, you captured it really incredibly. And so much of this is, the crux of it is kind of Arab-Jewish relations in Israel. And I thought kind of one of the heaviest moments of the film was your father said, "Your roots are important to you, but not to me."
Yeah.
And it's really a huge moment where he admits he doesn't identify as an Arab. And can you kind of elaborate how you have come to explore your identity and the journey of that?
I think it's actually a universal thing, because when you are a son of an immigrant, you try to blend in. And during making this film, I spoke with a lot of like Arab Jews that said, when my mother played Arab music, I was like turning it off. I was ashamed by it. And I'm a third generation, so I'm privileged enough to belong to the Israeli society that I don't need to kind of like, I want to feel my roots and enjoy them. Whereas for my father, I think it's so like complicated for him. He tried to be a European Jew with all of the elements that belong to this class. Even it's a class in Israel, and I think that a lot of like being an Arab Jew is like being belong to like the enemy, in a sense, and it's so layered and it's so fucked up. It is. Everything is fucked up in Israel. I have to say, I'm sorry. But even the fact that I can like talk openly about it, and for him, he tried to kind of like suppress that. And I went to take my PhD, like the degree with my parents, and I went to the airport for the first time with my father, because my parents divorced when I was 3, and so I mainly kind of like, my father was around, but he was, the fun parent, bringing me gifts and saying yes to whatever I want. So we went to the airport together, and everyone kind of like asked us a lot of questions and took him to the side and kind of like treated him differently because of the Mustafa and the Zaki. So I realized that the way he experienced life is very different than me. And I was very much ashamed of my last name, which is Zaki, because of the Arab, it's an Arab name, Arabic. Um, so I think it's important to remember that even though politics is very much prominent in our lives, the subjective experience and how we try to just belong, and some very intimate values that are before political values, just like belonging and your parents and family. So this is way more intimate and psychological than, for me now I can come and like say, yeah, as a leftist, like, yeah, that's uncool. Yeah, like you should kind of like speak Arabic or do this and that. But I'm privileged enough to belong. Even though I have to say that now I'm very worried about what's going on in Israel, so everything is kind of like different now. Even watching this film is different now. And even the fact that this film wasn't selected to a lot of festivals because of politics, and the fact that it's so nuanced, is, it shows how like binary is controlling the way that we want to see our political documentaries. But such stories does exist, and some people have layered identities and kind of like in the middle between things that are very personal and very loaded.
Have things changed for your father since seeing this film? I think things probably have changed since October 7th and all of that, but what about your relationship with your father and his kind of identity?
I think that after being in New York and having him crying and like understanding that his father wasn't a good like parent figure was very hard for me, and I felt very like a lot of guilt for putting him through this in a very like ethical, like documentary ethics. I teach that, and I'm so aware of that. But I knew that in order to have my film going as deep as I wanted, I have to put my father through something that is like hard for him. And it took me a while. But then at the end of the day, when he watches the film now and he got so much love from a lot of viewers, in Israel it was like the public broadcaster, and it was on YouTube, and people called him on landline and said, we saw your film, we were crying with you, laughing with you, we love you. And I think that I like kind of like outed him on his like Muslim part, and he was very worried about him. He thought he's not going to get jobs, or he's 80 now, but he's like, he was very worried about his father being a Muslim. And now I think that he's like, okay, nothing happened, and people still love me. And I think he told me that it was a very psychological, positive experience for him. But guilt is a very big part of it. And now, even seeing him now exposed this way, it's kind of like killing me.
Yeah.
Because he's very gentle and soft.
Yes.
He's a beautiful person.
He is. And it's a love story between you and your dad, too, which I absolutely love. And I want to include the audience. I want to
But
make
I didn't
you
have
a part.
kids, so maybe, that's kind of like the lesson from like all this very deep emotional parenting that is like, okay, I have to stop this cycle of suffering.
And what did it mean to your relationship with your father to be making this movie?
I think he was very touched by it. I think that for him, it was always like trying to kind of like prove that his mother was very big in the Arab world. And I didn't believe him even. But then when I started exploring, and I had some researchers in Egypt, and everyone knew her. And basically she was supposed to be very, very big, but it stopped right before. Because Kulthum kind of like acknowledged her as a singer. And that's a great, start. But her life is all about like how politics ruined her life, because she didn't care about religion or politics. She wanted to live in Egypt and make music. But I think that now for my father, it's like he's so pleased that people in Israel know about her and know about his story. And he's like, for the first time on like public television, she was singing in Arabic, and some people cannot handle this music and they leave the cinema even. But I think that for him, it is a very good experience, this film, and kind of like celebrating her music and giving her something that she really needed. Even though I still don't understand why she got back with my grandfather. And I didn't get the rent control apartment on Brooklyn Heights that I should have got. I told my father like 2 days ago, look, I'm walking, like I'm in Central Park, and I seriously don't understand why you didn't stay here and let me be here instead of growing up in Israel.
I mean, yeah, it was a Hollywood love story with twists and turns. It was insane and beautiful. Do we have any questions from the audience? I know I have a million more, but we'll include you.
Thank you so much.
I just have a few contextual questions. So first of all, what about your grandmother's family? What happened to her family in Egypt? Did they come to Israel? What's the story? And the other question is, in the kitchen scene when she was throwing out your father's clothes and said, you can't take care of, who was that woman who was sitting next to him?
There's something about documentary where people have to know everything, but we have to select what we're focusing on. So I got a lot of that about the woman. So basically, I'll start with this scene. So my father always told me, and that's why I created these scenes. Like he told me that after his army service, he told his mother that he's going to take a year off and go to his father maybe and think about like what he wants to do in the army service. And she was like, started throwing all of his stuff. He said it wasn't like that. It was the second floor. She was throwing stuff from the second floor. That was her mother. But she wasn't very prominent in our stories, in my family stories, like her brother and sisters. Apparently they were in Israel. But my father told me that after his mother kind of like threw all the books and clothes from the window, his grandmother came and did like a salt thing, like, you're okay now. So I did that, but he said it was way more dramatic. And her family, I think they are still there. I think that her mother waited until she left because she was worried about her. And the story says that her mother waited, and her mother came with a knife so that if like Mohammed's family would come because she's famous and stop them from going on this boat to Italy, she'll have a knife. Very feminist women, I have to say, beautiful women. But I'm not really in touch with her family, and I wasn't really connected to my Egyptian family, nor to my Muslim Egyptian family that I'm really dying to meet now. And at the beginning, my film was supposed to like take me and my brother to meet our Egyptian family. But then I started exploring like connection in Egypt, and it seemed like it's not going to work as an Israeli. But I haven't given up. I might like try and go and see my my Muslim family.
You and your grandfather came back to Israel.
Because back then it was okay.
How old were you?
I was probably 11 or 9 or 11. Yeah, he did. He was a very funny person, very entertaining. He spoke Arabic and English, and he used to tip everyone, even in the supermarket. Everyone loved him, as my father said, because he was very American with like rings and tipping everyone. It was Israelis. We don't do that. We don't tip even the people we should. So it was very different. But unfortunately, he died from cancer like a few years after they moved there. And I was so embarrassed to speak English back then. I was like really 11 or something. Today, my niece, she's 4 and she speaks English in Israel. But and then he died, and Suad, lived for a few years on her own, and she couldn't go to his funeral because women are not allowed in a Muslim funeral. Only afterwards they can go there. And then we visited, his grave and her grave, and for them it was life. For us, it's a very symbolic story, but I don't know. I really wish that people could connect so easily and simply as they did back then, and we're going backwards, and it's so sad to me.
I think we have another question up there. The microphone's coming.
I'm curious about the interview with your grandmother and when that was done, and was that like the Egyptian media that did the interview?
So there are 3 different interviews that were in the 80s and 90s. I mixed them all together. I was like so thrilled when I got to these materials because I was like looking for archival materials in Egypt. Actually, the photos from like magazines of my grandfather and my grandmother, I had these like 2 students in Egypt that went to like people that collect stuff and went through some stuff and found this, but there's plenty more. And the radio interviews were made in like BBC Arabic and Israel radio station, like Arabic. And when I had this Egyptian person translating them, because the Egyptian Arabic is a bit different than the Palestinian, so I had to find a good translator that understands everything. And I was so happy to listen to her talking about her life in first person. And that was like in the middle of my research. I was like so happy to get these materials. And I thought she's going only to talk about her music and musicians, but then she started talking about my grandfather and gossiping about the entire industry. So if any of you is going to make a film about Tugu Mizrahi and the Arabic movies, there's a lot about...
It was things she didn't even share with her own family, it seems like.
Yeah, because of the language, I think, and like barriers. Yeah.
Interesting.
Also, it's like ancient history in a sense. In Israel, it didn't exist.
Yeah.
Hi, I am from Egypt. I detect some little accent with the various people that represented Ms. Zaki. What's the background of the people that played her, essentially?
It's like I was trying to find Egyptian and then Arab actors, but I ended up taking Israeli actors, which I feel bad about until now. But she was like so connected to the story, and she was like, I'm going to do anything, everything to play her. But there was something about the fact that she's very humorous and very like my grandmother. I felt that there is some connection. But I did take Lilit Nagar from the Israeli Arabic radio that was Egyptian, and she was like, everything is, I cannot watch it. Like, the accent is so bad. But yeah, they're not Egyptians. And I did really want to have, I think that's political. The reason that it wasn't like the way I wanted it to be in a way, because it's very hard politically to kind of like create something that would be so simple and genuine in this way. But it is, I feel that it was a mistake to take her and not an Arabic speaker.
Iris, I want to thank you so much for being here with us and for sharing this film with us. Folks, thank you for being a part of this.